This brings to order the meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust. Today's date is, I got to cheat, the 19th of October, 2020, 8:30 in the morning. The meeting's taking place via video conference and is being recorded. In order to bring the meeting to order, if I can, I'd like a roll call of the current members of the trust. Start with you, Tom, if you don't mind.
Me here.
Yep. Rob?
Rob Henry here.
Diane?
Diane Kennedy here.
And Steve Gomer here. All right, meeting is called to order. We've got, bear with me here for a second. I'm cheating off of 4 screens. We've got really 2 items on the agenda today. And Cindy Amara has joined us. Cindy, beyond just the review of the request for proposal, I've also asked that if you would just be available to us as we review the bylaw with some of our thoughts on it, because I'm sure there's areas of guidance that we could use. Okay. So the two items on the agenda today are a review of the Affordable Housing Trust bylaw. And for that, I will turn it over to Tom here in just a second, because he's reviewed the bylaw with an eye toward consistency, potential issues for the future, as well as some thoughts on ways it could be streamlined and improved. And then, of course, the second thing is the review of the RFP for 808 Jerusalem, which was attached to your packet as well. And with that, I will, as I said, turn this over to Tom. Tom, I'm going to mute myself. If you don't mind, just take us through what you reviewed. And then after that, we'll open up for discussion, because each of you might have additional views on this or some thoughts on what Tom's put together. All right. Take it away, Tom.
Morning. Of course, I just said something. I don't know if that's too loud. Just one second. So what I did here was I took a look at the bylaw, and initially it was to go back over. I had when we drafted the trust, there were some things in the trust that didn't quite seem to make a lot of sense to me. And we realized what we did in the trust document was just basically borrow all the language from the bylaw. And so, I think we made what adjustments to the trust that we could, keeping it, in line with the bylaw. And then, as we discussed at that time, there's some things that we may want to go back and change, and that will require, us going to town meeting. So there are bylaw changes. And then, as I went through this in some detail, a couple of sort of housekeeping items came up. I think we all have a pretty good feel for what it is the trust is supposed to be doing. And then there were a couple of things in here that came up to me as, responsibility of ours that I know for me personally, I wasn't sort of thinking about it. And so it was helpful to go through in some detail and pull out a couple of those things. So just going literally top down from the letter that I had sent to you guys. From a standpoint of uses of funds, I went over this with everybody in the trust. That was around when we drafted the trust. I think there are some things in B14 that I think we want to widen the latitude on, and that would be to whom we can make grants or loans. I know for sure there are other affordable housing trusts that are set up in a way that allow them to make grants or loans to developers, not just directly to the end user. And so within the context of B14, that felt to me like one of the big items that needs to be expanded. I guess let me back up a little. So uses of funds, that also sort of runs under uses of funds. There's a little, what I'll call a nit Cindy, and I'll actually ask you to weigh in on this one. I don't know if you had a chance to review my letter. But it seems like we just left out a word in the bylaw and would want to point to not just community housing, but also affordable housing, or do you think that's like too literal of a reading? You're on mute, Cindy.
I'm never one to say that a very literal reading can never be applied. I am always aware that that's the case. I do think a very literal, narrow reading could result in what you said. I don't see a problem with including affordable as well. But
Yeah, I mean, I guess
you could easily, in the gamut of things, include affordable within that.
right. If we're gonna go after a bylaw change, that's an easy give, right?
That was one of the things I flagged because we don't use the term community housing ever in Cohasset. So I do think we should add to that or expand it somehow.
Well, yeah, the word, I think what it is because it's bringing in the language from the MGL 44B, which does cite community housing, right?
Right.
So I think it's just adding, we want to add it and just make the definition match.
Yep. Agreed.
So that was, that's really so that's the one sort of, let's call it nit. And then the other big change would be to discuss would be, should we bring in the idea that we are able to provide grants or loans, to the developer, whether for-profit or nonprofit. And that's really it from the overall changes. I think we have, wide latitude. Oh, the other literal narrow reading, Cindy, was this idea of, we can't, it seems to say we can't spend any money without getting, this is all the way down into C, the last page of my note. So two things, a literal narrow reading problem, and then a bigger issue, which is this idea of an allocation plan. And to flush out my thinking there, my thoughts were, again, we don't know what's going to come up during the year, and this doesn't seem to give us a lot of flexibility to deal with that stuff when it comes up in the middle of the year. When we were first talking about the AHT, the actual trust document, we talked about this, Cindy, at some length, I think in one of our in-person meetings, in which that was, and you made a very good point. I was thinking we need latitude and we can't go to the selectmen every time we want to do something. And at that time I was raising the idea of like, hey, what if a deal comes up mid-year? We don't want to go back to them for a deal. You made a very good point, which was like, these things don't happen fast. So we, along with the steering committee, could put together the proposal, approve it from the AHT standpoint, and then get the selectmen to sign off on it. That's not going to create timing issues for us. Usually real estate deals don't happen that fast, but it is much more so in that reading of, if they think, any deals can't be done outside of what was in the allocation plan, which is required to be done annually, that is an issue. So
I think as a more practical matter as well, there's no way, it's 20 years now I've been working in and around this town. There is no way that you can put together an allocation plan that actually looks forward and anticipates the opportunities or roadblocks that are going to arise. That's number one. And number two, Diane, call me crazy. Have we ever even heard of an allocation plan?
Nope.
Yeah. So the language itself is foreign to the town and any operation that we take on. There is an additional item that Tom's brought up that I do see as problematic from the standpoint of operating as a trust. And that is that the language exists. Tom, forgive me, I forget where, but ultimately what it says is that we have, the trust has the capacity to acquire, dispose of property, enter into loans, et cetera. Yet at the same time, there's a conflicting piece of language that says acquisition and disposition of any piece of property has to be approved by the selectmen,
right.
which defeats the independence of the trust.
So this is
That's
But this is that little nuance that Cindy and I talked about. I flagged that way back when, and Cindy
Right.
kind of brought me around on it, which is, this, if I can paraphrase what she said, that would be typical. Yes, us in the steering committee will, review all the deals and all that stuff, and then we'll make our recommendation. The idea is, and this may be, this is where I'm talking about, not exactly a rubber stamp, and this is where I was uncomfortable, got comfortable, but Steve, you're raising it again, which is like, all right, well, let's just take Jerusalem, Nevada. Let's take the hospitality partners, right? If they come to us with something that we like, we agree with, we want to say, let's do this. If we need to then go to the selectmen for, sort of final stamp, that does feel not right.
The issue at hand, from my perspective, is one of governance and process. It has nothing to do with where our individual authority might lie as an entity. The issue at hand, as I see it, is that the selectmen have management over the trust, and they are the answerable body to the electorate, right? How do they have management over the trust? They have appointment authority that arises every single year. So in effect, in a 3-year stand, the trust can turn over in its entirety and reflect exactly what that board wants to reflect. And as you know, nothing moves all that fast in real estate. It moves quickly. Opportunities arise quickly, and they a seller, as an example, wants action. They're not going to stick around for 6 months waiting for an annual meeting. They may not stick around 2.5 months waiting for a lazy board chairman. Not Diane, not you. But we've known them, right? Waiting for a lazy board chairman to put this item on an agenda, right? And therein lies the importance of the ability for the trust to act in a fiduciary manner, but independently.
Yeah. So I'm back with you.
well,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's the point, right? We need the autonomy. I think we
well, I think it benefits the operation of the trust as a fiduciary entity. Now, Diane is trying to make a point in here, so I want to make sure that we hear from her, not only because she's a member of the board, but also a sitting member of the select board.
well, what I was going to say is, I mean, I flagged both of those when I reread this last night, and the way I read the current bylaw, there is some expectation of the trust reporting to, either town meeting and the select board. So I think we need to find some way to do that responsibly. But at the same time, our understanding from the trust point of view is that we're an independent actor and we have the ability to make decisions, that are in the best interest of our goals, and steward this money. So I don't have an answer, except that I think we need to find a way to balance both. I think, honestly, from a political standpoint, if we were to go to town meeting and say, the select board is, we've removed them from our reporting structure, and we're not going to go to town meeting with a plan, that could just shake things up. So I one of the things I put in my little comments was, what are other towns doing? How can we have this, sort of accountability reporting line and maintain some independence? And that's the question. I don't have an answer to.
Okay, thank you, by the way. And allow me to clarify my thoughts. Cindy, I'm coming right to you. My thought on it is not that we are looking to remove ourselves from a reporting responsibility, either to town meeting or to the selectmen. The real issue as it arises from my perspective is the ability to act independently. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean keeping everybody in the dark, but rather the ability, for instance, does the trust truly have the ability to enter into a transaction or not? I mean, it seems strange that we could indebt the town, right? Or actually indebt the trust, right? We can indebt the trust, but we can't buy a piece of property without without an approval. And the issue can arise with an currently unforeseeable board composition that would just stand in the way of anything. Okay.
Yes,
And that's where, yeah, exactly. And that's where the operative piece of this becomes important. That is not to reflect that for any reason we shouldn't be fulfilling our reporting duties. And Cindy, so before turning to you for your response as well, just a question for you, if you don't mind addressing it. Where in the structure does the trust actually report? I understand that the members are appointed by the selectmen, the elected body, but do we actually report to the executive, or do we report to the legislative, or do we report to both? As an entity in the structure of town.
I think that's really kind of all of the above, and it depends. I know that's really not the kind of answer you want. Let's start with the easy piece. Anytime you're using CPC funds, you got to be responsible and you have to go through the process, and town is involved.
Right.
And a lot of times, particularly on big purchases, CPC funds are involved because that's usually where you get the money for those projects. So from a practical perspective, the tension with your bylaw, I think, is actually an attempt at checks and balances. It doesn't say, that the selectmen can force you to do something, right? They don't have the ability to say, spend your money on this project. They have an approval. But keeping in mind that they're behind you and they've appointed you, they want to make sure that what you do is consistent with the affordable housing needs of the town, but also they've got an oversight role in terms of making sure that everything's lined up in terms of what you're purchasing or not. They wouldn't want to have you buy a piece of property that, say, for ownership reasons you couldn't or shouldn't, or was already in the town's ownership. I mean, it's more of an oversight. I've not known in my experience where there's been any kind of pushback and turning down of a project recommended by an affordable housing trust. Now, that being said, I'm happy to go back and look at a few cities and towns jump to mind to see just how broad they go and just how broad you can go. But keep in mind that the selectmen still have an oversight role, and that they're appointing you to do something on behalf of the town, and you're this weird kind of independent body, and therein lies the tension. And I know it's not a black and white answer that you want, but I think as a practical matter, I agree 100%. If you were to go to town meeting and say, we want to change this 100%, you'd get shot down in the dark. And then you would be under their scrutiny more often. That being said, I think there might be room to tweak it, but let me look around and see just how far other towns have gone. And if you want me to talk briefly about the plan, I also want to see exactly how detailed a requirement that is anywhere. But it says you have to submit this allocation plan, and it's supposed to be a general plan, which means it doesn't have to have all that much detail. So you can craft it so that what specific goals you have, or maybe specifically you want to have purchase 2 properties in the course of the year, or bring 10 units online in the course of the year, whatever. Your allocation plan, I think, can be pretty general and still maintain your flexibility so that when things come up, they're consistent with your kind of allocation plan so that you can act on them.
All right. And maybe we change the word allocation, maybe we come up with a goals, or, some kind of goals plan for the year.
I think of it more as like kind of the same kind of structural language that you see in CPC, that a certain percentage of it has to go here, a certain percentage there.
Oh, yep.
I'm thinking some of this, and this was part of my comment, was like, once the trust is up and running, this may become easier to do. I feel like part of it is a budgeting exercise. to the extent that we own property or administer property or administering loans, like we're going to have a certain level of expenditures related to existing assets. That's, much easier to do, and that can be part of this. So I don't, it doesn't have to be, certainly doesn't have to be eliminated overall. I think Cindy would like, but I think that's part of I hear what you're saying. You could make it pretty wide and try to catch a net, to say, we want to make 2 acquisitions and I don't know. It would have to be pretty wide, the allocation plan. If the idea is to leave the construct in, the allocation plan would need to be pretty wide, almost to the point of like, why are we doing this? If it's just, kind of check a box.
Maybe there's some wisdom in your coming up with a list of the types of things, work at it backwards, the types of things that you would be concerned about being restricted from doing if you had a plan in place. Maybe if we have some examples of that, it'd be easier to kind of work backwards out of that.
Yeah.
I see your point. I see the tension, and I'm happy to look to see just how far other towns have gone. But
yeah, I think part of it is like we're starting from zero, right? Like we don't have,
Right.
we don't know how this is going to go, right? Like, I can only, my limited experience with this is like in, kind of keeping an eye on this stuff from afar is in Quincy. Like they've had incredible development and developers have been just happy to pay in. So now the AHT is sitting on all this money, that they necessarily didn't know was coming. And so that's what I'm thinking, like, this would be a good problem to have, right? All of a sudden, if we're overfunded and our allocation plan doesn't allow us to spend the money, I might be trying to solve for stuff. But the point is, if we're going to make a bylaw change, like, we don't want to go do that again, right? So even though we are sort of a little startup venture here, we want to think about what this looks like when we're,
Operational.
funded and operational and all that stuff. And then the other thing I would say is, again, with the whole idea of literal reading, if we can clean up C, at the very bottom of my letter, it says expenditures for the acquisition or disposition of real property shall be subject to approval by majority vote of the Board of Selectmen. I'd ask you again to take a close look at that. If I read it literally and narrowly, like, we couldn't even do zoning or engineering, like research work, right? That's expenditures for the acquisition of a new deal, let's say. I can't hire an attorney to search the title for me,
As a literal reading, Cindy, the issue really surrounds the term expenditure, right? If the reading, if C read that the acquisition or disposition of real property shall be subject to the approval by a majority vote of the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah.
Now you're good.
Yeah. That's all you gotta do, really, is strike that. Yeah.
And it leaves in place the ability for the selectmen to support or not the actions of the major actions of the trust.
See, I like that, because that gives them the oversight and says, yes, they can go thumbs up or thumbs down on a particular deal.
Right. And from my point of view, thinking about it, Steve brought up the idea of, what if you have a board of selectmen, a select board that, isn't on board with all of this stuff. I want to look at the other way. We might have a trust in the future, that's hoarding money or doing things. And I think that it really we do need the select board kind of stamp of approval to make sure that whatever the trust is doing is actually, meets the goals and objectives of not only the town, but the Affordable Housing Steering Committee, and making sure all those connections are made. So, and then the other piece to your point, Steve, is that you don't want the select board approving, engineering expenses or, zoning work or legal or accounting or anything. We should have that kind of autonomy to be able, the trust should have that autonomy to be able to make those expenses.
Right. As I said, under the governmental structure, the selectmen, the Board of Selectmen, select board, whatever we're calling you guys these days, right?
Select
You're
board,
the,
yeah.
you're the elected body answerable to the voter.
Yeah.
And your direct power over the conduct of the trust is the power of appointment, right? Every year, two of us, or one third of the discretionary appointment comes up. So there is direct oversight, right? Now, having said that, to your point, there are boards that can be influenced, and it's strange the people that get elected, right? And it's especially strange that people get elected when there's no competition for that seat. And the result can be stagnation. So if the language continues to exist that expenditures, right, expenditures are subject, then all of a sudden, as Tom points out, you can grind everything to a halt by simply putting a stranglehold on, on the very basics. I mean, it might be something as simple as a permitting fee.
I totally agree. And,
Right.
and we're actually dealing with that to some degree with legal expenses for boards that have the ability to, like us, that have the ability to seek their own legal counsel. So,
Right. I know that question arose about the AHT, you look at it. I remember leaning over to Cindy in a meeting saying, "Are we in problems here?" She goes, no, right here. You've got the authority. But that's exactly the point. So that actually conflicts with the other piece of the bylaw, which gives us the ability to go out and hire professional consulting expertise for particular projects.
right.
So anyway, all right.
So I think you solved that to some
Yes,
degree.
Tom.
Yep.
Yep.
Tom.
Okay, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, so Cindy, specific drafting suggestion on C, and then you can back check it against, what other towns look like. If you literally just strike expenditures for and start that section with the acquisition or disposition of real property. And then I wonder if we can carry forward that same notion into the allocation plan, where you say something to the effect of, in each fiscal year, the fund shall provide an allocation plan, which will be approved at town meeting, blah, blah, blah.
I'm not sure I'm
State-
following you on that.
Do you have C,
Yeah.
or do you want me to put my screen up?
Oh,
No, I'm looking at it. I just don't follow what you just said.
Okay, so you see where it says in each fiscal year expenditures from the fund?
Yeah,
Second sentence. If you just take that same idea, remove the idea of expenditures, and instead just put the fund on the hook to provide the allocation plan to be approved at town meeting.
okay.
So would that be similar to, Cindy, like the CPC, annual article about their allocation, 1/3 goes here, 1/3 goes, or whatever it is?
The CPC is set out by state statute. You have no choice but to do those things.
Right.
Here, you've got a great deal of flexibility on how exactly it plays out and what exactly it does.
Right.
To your point about oversight, the allocation plan, to the extent you have this allocation plan and it shows that you've got a board hoarding money, that's a way for people to then get the town to get involved and see that and change that. If they see that there are no projects. I'm not saying I don't agree with your removal of or the use of funds. Let me just look at that. I think at the top, it makes perfect sense because then it's clear acquisition and disposition, I think is fine, but I think down below, let me just do a little more digging onto what I think you need. And does anyone know what the intent was when this was adopted? I guess I know the answer.
Circular reasoning.
Tom?
If I could flush it out even a little further, Cindy, I think what I'm getting at is, if the trust needs to provide an allocation plan,
Mm-hmm.
right, make that a requirement, and then that has to be approved at town meeting. And then we have an annual audit function, right, beyond the CPA audit, but the books and records of the trust will be audited on an annual basis. So there's sort of your oversight piece, is we're going to provide an allocation plan. It's going to be a little bit, it's going to give us plenty of latitude. We're going to have the requirement for acquisition or disposition of real property from the select board. And then, because I'm looking the other way, it's not a board that hoards money, but maybe a board that either wastes money or, is out there doing too much.
Yeah.
And so the select board with the acquisition disposition language kind of keeps us in the rails on that. And then look, it's a little backward looking, but we have to report on an audited basis what we spent money on. And if we're getting outside of where we was, if we're just sprinkling money around to the attorneys and the engineers, that can be reined in, again, it's kind of after the fact, but it can be quickly reined in by, replacement of, the board or direction from the selectmen or whatever that might be. That makes sense?
Yeah, Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm listening to this thing because I come, you all, a lot of you have a lot of the town, political thing, and I look at it more from a business thing. And I think the statement was made before that we've never had a so-called allocation plan, yet we're using it. And I really like to suggest, Diane started getting into it, goals, but goals and objectives. It's a big term used in business, and that's kind of where we're coming from in a real practical sense. We're trying to set goals, then we have objectives. And I think that's how we have to look at this thing in terms of, and also going back to the how long it takes with real estate things. But yet we need the ability to react quickly. All of a sudden we find out something from somebody, and we need to do it within a week or two or whatever. I mean, we just need that authority. Now we think that since that we are appointed, that they would have the confidence that we would make the right decision. But then again, like we say, we don't pull a deal and not tell the selectmen. It's the same thing you would do in a company. You would not tell the CEO what you're doing, but he would say, go ahead and do it. Just keep me in the loop. But I think that we should look at, so specifically here with section C, allocation plan to me is a very nebulous term where you could have something more specific like goals and objectives, or maybe there's other terms too, that would work better and I think further define what we're trying to do as the trust.
Diane?
One consideration would be that we give an annual report, and it could also be an audit to town meeting instead of going to town meeting for approval of anything, because I look at it from strictly the mechanics of town meeting. Like, is this an article? What is it? Like, other than that, we're just dealing with the budget. So maybe what we do is we give a annual report to town meeting. And I just lost my train of thought. We do, sorry, annual report to town meeting. We keep the select board the way it is, yeah.
But are you saying that, I mean, does anybody think that we could replace this allocation with goals and objectives or something that's a little more definitive, a little more practical?
Hold on just a second, because your question is a practical one. Yet at the same time, I just got to check with Cindy. Cindy, is this state language in the state law, an allocation plan?
I was trying to quickly find out for sure, and I haven't been able to confirm that it is or isn't. I have not stumbled upon the phrase yet, but that's the first thing I'm going to check, because I don't seem to have encountered this issue anywhere. Fighting about what is and isn't. So let me double check on that, and I'll give the information to you today.
All right. So Rob, to your point, one of the beautiful things about government is if you can determine whether or not the phrase is statutory and you find out that it's not, then you redefine the phrase. Okay. Goals and objectives. All right. And Cindy's got a point. So go ahead, Cindy.
The only other thing I was going to say, to the point of goals and objectives, in the allocation plan itself, you can, I mean, it's broad enough, particularly the way it is now, you can set it up however you want. So it may have a section that's a summary of what you've done in the year, a summary of your goals, a summary of your objectives, and where you want to go and how much money you think you want to devote to certain things. You may also want to have, excuse me, and this goes to the question sort of at the beginning of the phrase where you want to get rid of expenditures on acquisition or disposition. You don't have just acquisitions and dispositions of property. You also have concerns about how much money do you want to give or devote to individual homeowners or renters
Loan program.
versus just buying property and getting rid of the property. So that also comes up in goals and objectives, how you want to figure out, and this becomes more of not even an issue, but not in a bad way. Once you have more money to play with, really, how much of it do you want to spend towards buying and selling property versus how much do you want to really devote towards other aspects of accommodating your goals. So I think all those things can be put into an allocation plan focused on goals and objectives, which can change as you grow and by definition can change every year.
All right, so give me just a second, Diane, if I may. Cindy, please take a look at state law to find out whether or not allocation plan is in some way, shape, or form statutory language, and if so, what does it mean?
Yep.
Because I think that's where we're stumbling over this, saying no one knows what it means. Diane's interpretation of it as taking the form of an annual report makes a great deal of sense within the context of town meeting, right? You report out what you've done, you report out where you're going. To your point, Rob, that really becomes goals and objectives, and we without being bound by statutory language, we can redefine the terms and the practicality or the practical use of the endeavor. Because it's 9:10, we still got to cover the RFP, the draft RFP. What I'm going to suggest is the following, and if you're okay with it, we'll go from here. Cindy's going to determine statutory language. Tom, let's do a markup. All right, a red line markup, whereby we start to build this in the way that we'd like to see it, and it doesn't actually sound like there's a whole lot of language change.
No.
Right?
I agree.
We're talking about removing the term expenditures from section C.
Yep.
But keeping the acquisition disposition intact. Let's try now. Cindy's answer is going to be determinative, but let's try taking out allocation plan and using something along the lines of annual report or goals and annual goals and objectives.
And
Right?
it goes into the town report, then it, that which gets presented to town meeting as a unit, as opposed to having some separate town meeting.
Yeah, because
vote or-
the point there would be like, we really should only go to town meeting if there's something we actually need town meeting for, right? We don't want to
money.
set the precedent for ourselves to have to be there every year for
Right.
something if it's more just a reporting.
And,
Right.
and,
And
and
I think-
separately, separately, one of the things we're going to be considering
Get further.
Diane, you froze.
CPC is going to go on an automatic year and allocate those to the Affordable Housing Trust, which will that has to be approved, and that will, that will be a vote at town meeting. So,
Okay.
sorry, my computer just wigged out.
Yeah, Cindy, one other thing that comes up is that there are restrictions, actually two now that I think about it. There are restrictions built around application of CPC funds. And there are requirements that go with it. Most of which, when I read it, was Greek to me. And I would imagine certainly to Rob and Tom and Diane probably has a better understanding of it. Could you give us a summary? And I just mean a summary, like what does that really mean to us? Or is that a function of something that CPC needs to fulfill? If it's something that the trust would need to fulfill before we can expend those funds, we certainly got to make sure that we're keeping track of it. So we're not trying to, we're not trying to fill in the blanks in April for money we spent in October.
Very specifically, Cindy, I think it's B1 and G5 that we're going to want you to synopsize for us. B1 definitely grabs what Steve was looking for. In G5, I don't know that we need you to synopsize the DHCD rules that will apply, but one of the things that I wanted to hit as we went through this was, so for example, we sell 808 Jerusalem Road, one of the oversight and governance items here for us as a trust, we are to make sure that all units shall be constructed or converted through the local initiative or local access programs as governed by the then applicable regulations of DHCD. Now, that's a mouthful to say, never mind for us to try to administer, right? Like whether it's prevailing wage, whether it's this, that. I know the RFP will kind of put the collars around most of that, but then from the on the ground standpoint, who's really responsible to make sure that's happening? If it's us, we need some help and we have some homework to do.
Okay.
Okay.
A lot of the CPC restrictions are at the town meeting level about what you can use CPC funds for. And that's usually the battle, and oftentimes it centers around turf fields is one of the ones that people often fight about whether you can or can't use. But there will be oversight and follow-up to make sure you're using the funds as they have been dedicated. But most of the CPC requirements under the statute are at the town meeting level of what you can use the funds for. Once they get dedicated there, you have to use them according to what they were voted for, but that's really not much different. And there will be some recording requirements, but I will get you that.
All right, one last question. Ed. Actually, no, sir, there's a couple of other comments too. One last question I had from my point of view was, is there any reason that we would not use the then current town auditor to audit the trust?
I guess the question, I mean, I don't know who you're asking or if it's just a general question.
I'm sorry, Cindy. I'm asking. I have that's directed to you from the perspective of our requirement to audit the trust annually. And the town typically puts out an RFP for an auditor, what, every 3 or 5 years, Diane?
Yep.
Now is common practice.
Yep.
So the real question is, should we have an independent audit, or could we rely upon the town to conduct that for this entity?
I think the town would not conduct it for you, but that's a different question from whether you can use the same person. And I think that goes both ways. Here's our books, town, you take a look at it, and let's hope we meet your standards, and we're sure we're being transparent, and we will. On the other hand, if there's sentiment that people aren't happy with what you're doing, or some movement against the Affordable Housing Trust, you might want to be independent. I really think that's a decision for the board or the trustee.
I would say, if I can just jump right in, we would want our own auditor.
I would think.
Somebody with some experience in affordable housing specifically. There's some stuff to deal with.
I agree for a whole bunch of reasons.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay. All right. That's not a that's not a motion at this point. Maybe as we wrap up this, if you want to take that on as a motion, we can act on that today. But that wasn't one of my, actually, now that I think about it, no, we can't. It's not on the agenda. But Jen, if you would, put on the next agenda, please, the vote on it, on auditor for the trust.
Will do.
Thank you. All right. On this topic alone, does anyone have further comment? Tom?
So we didn't cover this idea. It's going to come up again in the RFP, but we didn't cover this idea of potentially changing B14 to allow us to make grants or loans to developers.
Right.
Oh, shit. Sorry.
That's huge.
Sorry about that. Yeah. And it would seem to be, especially on 808 Jerusalem, it's going to come up. Right?
Well, it's
suggest that-
not, because we're gonna convey, we're gonna be under, with 808, well, if it's just the land, with 808, we're gonna be covered under B15. If an RFP comes in, here's a perfect example. An RFP comes in for 808, And they do what a lot of developers will do, which would be to ask for money from AHT to cover some of their pre-development costs. We could not provide that money directly to the RFP winner under the way I read B14.
Do you want to probably add that for a vote next weekend? I mean, next meeting?
Well, let's step back before, if you're talking about B14, Jen, I'm not sure. I think that would actually go into the markup that we're talking about with Tom. But the question I think goes to Cindy in this case, do you see that as being problematic?
I see them as doing different things. I mean, one is giving you authority to help individuals, okay? That's what it's saying. You can give loans and you can give grants to individuals. And the goal being you want to encourage individuals who otherwise wouldn't have the means to have independent home ownership. I think that should be separate. 15 talks about your ability to deal with a nonprofit developer. And I think within that, to convey through sale, lease, or transfer, there's a whole lot you can do in that to help them. And that can be in terms of, in part, the purchase price of the property so that they have some money for startup. I don't know that, right? So I kind of think they should be separate. And I think they're geared towards different goals.
In that context, Cindy, the reading of it, 14 would be, as you point out, to individual entities and or individual persons, and 15 would be toward entities. But the question that I have then, to Tom's point, does convey through sale, lease, or transfer allow us to make loans or grants to those for-profit or not-for-profit entities?
I think you do have the ability to do that, but I will double check. And you definitely have the ability to craft whatever it is you're doing with the entity so that it falls within that broad scope of transferring real estate interest. And how you do that, I mean, you can be in a P&S, it can be in terms of a lease that, they only pay so much the first few months so that they can conserve some of their income. And let me just go back and check your document on the trust document itself. I don't think there's a limit. I mean, these are very broad things to make sure that you have these broad powers that without which you could not act.
Right.
How you deal with a developer is different, I think.
I'd put this right in there though. I mean, so we're all saying the same thing, which is B14 is meant to deal with, affordable homeowners, right? So that's fine. You don't want to mix that up. But B15 is ultra specific. It's saying I can take real property. So take the end of the sentence first. I can take real property purchased under this bylaw, and I can convey it out. Right. So that there's no money there. There's no cash. I can't make a loan to a developer. And I can tell you for sure, 100%, like in my, conventional finance world, like we see subsidy stacking, and affordable housing trust loans, grants would be in the capital stack of an affordable housing development. Like the developer, even a for-profit developer, can be granted funds, cash grants and or mortgages from the AHT into a project. And I can't see anywhere in our bylaw or our trust document where we would have the authority or the ability to do that. And I think that's something we want to provide for. I've seen it done.
I'll take a double check at your documents, but I don't see this particular provision as limiting you. But let me make sure that your trust document authorizes you to.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Alrighty. Are we good to go? I'm sorry. Is everybody good to leave this subject for now? Okay.
No
the follow-up.
motion. I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
No, as I say, the next step on this is to produce a markup. All right, how do we want it to read? What are the areas that would need to be addressed? Diane?
No, I just wondered, I'm wondering out loud whether we should put it up as a Google Doc, because there's a lot of like little language things I want to change, but I don't think we can because of open meeting law. Yep,
Yeah.
Lauren's shaking her head no.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's probably not gonna,
All right.
fly. Cindy?
You can all funnel your comments through me.
That's
and
right.
I can circulate one document that has everyone's comments in it.
Okay.
Excellent.
So does everybody have access to Word?
I hope so.
Okay, so you actually, we've all got it on PDF. If Jen, do you know if you have a copy of the bylaw?
I can
On-
convert it.
Oh, thank you.
No
Okay,
problem.
so Jen will circulate. Jen will, to each of you, send a copy of the bylaw in a Word format. If you've never done it before, just go to the review section, click track changes. You can then type in your own comments or adjustments. Those can get directed. I think probably the best bet, Cindy, instead of flinging emails around, is just send them back to Jen. Jen can forward them on to you for assembling into something final.
Works.
Or not final, but some amalgamated form. Okay. And once again, Tom, thank you very much for tackling this. It's tackling it and organizing it. I think we made some very good progress, and that's really interesting because if we're going through this right now in October, it actually squares us up pretty well to be able to execute a proposed warrant article, which the board will start to consider roughly mid to end of January. So,
Cool.
okay, that's great progress on this particular piece and removes a couple of roadblocks that probably crop up at the worst possible time. All right, let's move on to the proposed RFP.
Can I make a first comment?
Yes, sir.
Right in the second line, for some reason, it just says a qualified nonprofit developer. It should say for-profit and nonprofit developer.
Comment, Cindy?
I'm sorry?
Any comment on that?
No. The goal is what you want to have in your RFP and who you want to solicit from. It's what they're going to do. You can have a profit developer who's going to do something on a reduced rate and do it for the affordable housing.
We just went over in the bylaws. It says profit, for-profit, or nonprofit. And why do we just put nonprofit in this one?
That's a decision for you all to make in my mind.
I think going, not only in this, but going forward, there's plenty of developers out there who are for-profit that get involved in these type of activities. I've known many that get into it, with the habitat and all that. So I think we're limiting ourselves here. There's certainly a lot more for-profit than there are nonprofit builders and developers. So I think that should be added right away.
I agree.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I totally agree. It was the first thing I marked up. We do have Rob. I don't know if Rob had, if there's any reason that the steering committee thought it should be limited to nonprofit.
Rob, are you auditing here? Okay.
I am auditing it. Yeah, I don't see any reason why it would need to be limited to nonprofits. I think we want to do whatever the best option is.
I think each of us recognizes that there's an interest, with a specific nonprofit. But having said that, I don't think there's any reason to steer this.
No.
Especially since we already heard from
a
Cohasset
for-profit.
Hospitality Partners looking at this and saying we could joint venture with it. I would think that if it is nonprofit, that could create problems for any kind of joint venture.
And it's really limiting it to do that. So.
All right. All right, moving along. Additional comments by each or any of you.
I don't have any.
Tom?
Yeah, under general deed restrictions, is there a particular reason why we want to restrict the resale of this property to a qualified first-time home buyer? That doesn't any affordable buyer, anybody who meets the,
Hey, Lauren, Jen, Cindy, in the composition of this, is there any reason for that?
Oftentimes I see it as first-time home buyers because that's the market you're really trying to target. That's consistent with language I've seen in a lot of the RFPs. I know that's not a particularly great answer.
I would just add that I would echo that. I mean, a lot of times they just happen to be geared toward either first-time home buyer. I've also seen like veteran or like senior, you know, but I if you would want to open it up to any affordable,
well, that's,
anybody who would meet the income restrictions, I don't see a problem with that. It's just some towns or processes pretend to give a preference to that, in my understanding.
I just, for our own constituencies here, right? Like we, you know, we would have, I think, you know, seniors who, the part of the beef in town, right, is like, hey, I lived in town my whole life and I want to continue to live here. You know, that I think that might preclude some seniors from qualifying.
And the military too. I mean, I think again, we're restricting ourselves unnecessarily.
Cindy?
The only thing I will say here, and this is not a legal comment, this is truly a policy decision on your part. This is for one particular project, and the question is, at this point in time, do you want to target your general need for general affordable housing, or do you want to specifically in this particular property target seniors or veterans? Because my guess is if you open it up, you will, just by the way things generally tend to work, the seniors, particularly in this day and age, and the veterans will rise to the top of the income level, all things being equal. And is this particular project and this particular location, bad use of words again, geared towards either of those populations in terms of location and accessibility versus what's the best use of the property? And that's really a policy decision. Just keep it in mind when you make the decision.
Diane?
So my thinking on this is that property and what is likely to be able to happen there is probably two townhouse kind of things. I don't think it's the right property for elderly or, you know, anyone with any kind of mobility challenges, et cetera. Having said that, does, you know, why wouldn't we cast a wider net? And to Cindy's point, how do you qualify somebody? Would we have to choose somebody? And what if it is the right location or the wrong physical space for somebody who wants that, but rose to the top of the selection list, if you will?
Well, again, depending upon the respondents to the RFP, you know, we know, at least from basic presentation, that many nonprofits also look to handle the administration and the allocation of the property. Right? Who wins?
Okay.
Right? That doesn't become a trust function. Now, that doesn't mean that that's going to happen, but that's what I understand can be the case. From my viewpoint, yeah, would I rather see a development for an aging population near the village? Sure. And for vets near the village? Sure. Or near the train station or something like that? Yep. But I do believe that a good chunk of that should be self-selecting. And, you know, this is my personal opinion. We have such a dearth of affordable housing in the town, that if we start trying to target it, we're really basically saying those people outside of the target have several years to wait before we can get around to them, as best we can see at the moment.
Steve, am I misunderstanding? When I said that open it up more, I didn't say, do we have to be specific to veterans and seniors? We can't still include first-time homebuyers?
No. Exactly. To your point, Rob, that's exactly where I'm going with this.
Yeah, okay, because I just want to make
First-time
sure.
home buyers, basically, if you qualify, my view is if you qualify, you should be eligible to
Exactly.
pursue this property. Cindy, go ahead.
All that being said, I believe regardless, I mean, if someone qualifies, you could have a first-time home buyer who is a senior, who is a vet, they would qualify, they go in the mix. If they rise to the top, they get it. Keep in mind though, when this is an RFP going out to someone who's going to develop. And I think you may, given the size of the project, it might impact the development proposals you'll get if you have a wider net. And as long as you're aware of that, that's fine, because you might configure something differently if you're concerned about marketing towards seniors or marketing towards veterans or marketing towards families.
I don't think we're talking about handicap, but we're not talking about, I guess you're going like if it's for handicap. I don't think you do that. And if you did have a handicap, I've been involved in a lot of projects that, last minute, you can add some things that would help people who have any kind of a problem. I don't see anything that's going to restrict the developer, the builder, from providing a quotation proposal based on if it's a senior, veteran, or first-time homebuyer.
It's entirely a policy decision for the board to trust to decide.
We had a hand raised from Rob Jeffers. Rob?
What I'd mention is I think it'd be fine to open it up to all. I think if you do say specific things like seniors don't need to, in general, aren't going to be looking for a 3-bedroom. So people like Habitat is looking to get as many people into a unit as possible. So like that's why they tend to have 2 or 3 bedrooms. So I think to Cindy's point, if we say just seniors, well, then you're probably looking at 1-bedroom units, as opposed to multi-bedroom units. So I think if you leave it open, it's probably, fine. And, Habitat will propose what they normally propose for theirs, and somebody else could come in and propose a senior development that might be more units, but less bedrooms. But I think to Steve's point, I don't think you want to narrow it down too much. I'll say this, I've said it before, I'll say it again, we are at 0 developed houses in the past decade. So I think we want to do anything we can to try to get to that, to a positive number.
I think we're in agreement, right? Just open it up, Tom.
Yep. Cindy?
So you really just want to take out the phrase first-time homebuyer?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a substitute phrase to enter, I suppose it would be, something that communicates qualified buyer of a deed restricted property.
Well, the affordability, I think, covers all that. You just
Okay.
about the first time part.
Yeah. Super.
Lauren, I'll let you
Yes.
find it all.
Rob, you just disappeared. Are you taking a vacation?
Yeah.
No, not Rob.
No.
Jeffers. Man, there he is.
I'm doing 2 things at once, so
No, not you. I was talking about Rob Henry.
I got a phone call.
I just need a poll of the board at this point. Are we in agreement that we would like to, on the RFP, open up the eligibility beyond first-time home buyers?
I say yes.
Diane?
Unless somebody tells me a reason we shouldn't, I say yes. I don't think this property would accommodate, some of the other populations, but that's going to self-select itself.
I think Cindy's point on the possible outcomes here is that we might actually get a flood of interest. A much greater number of respondents from developers. I guess that would be a nice problem to have. Tom?
Yeah, I'm fine with opening it up, cast the widest net. Somebody said it, that's the way I would say it. And the other things we have to realize is like what we're doing is we're going out with an RFP. And then the respondents are going to be, you might have a senior housing respondent and you might have a family housing respondent, right? And you might have these different proposals, and then we'll be able to choose who we think has the best ability to execute and is the best outcome for us. So we're just setting the rules of the game, and then people are going to come in and tell us what they want to do. And developers are the best ones. I made this point with CHP on the phone last time. They're the best ones to tell us what they can execute, right? So cast the widest possible net and bring the proposals, and let's see what's what.
All right, Diane?
And this is for Lauren and Cindy. Is there an art to our selection? I mean, are we able to pick the proposal that makes the most sense for Cohasset, or are we going to be, forced to make a decision based on some prescribed rule or law somewhere?
So I would, Cindy can add any more to this that I might not cover, but the way that it's going to work is that all the responses will be ranked, and there's sort of the highly advantageous, things like that. So you rank it according to those parameters, and then from there, you're not going to pick the one that ranked not advantageous. Of course, you're going to select out of your highest ranking, but there's the deference to the decision making there as to how you're going to rank those. So, and then you would have it based on that. And then in terms of actually like selecting sort of who lives here, it typically goes to like a lottery sort of process. There's like a whether it's the individual developer who handles it or whether they sub it out to a different affordable lottery company that does this, that's then how you would pick who would live there. So.
All right. Let me, are we generally in agreement then that we've covered the points that caught our interest in this in the draft RFP? All right, Tom.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of comments, it looks like, from Cindy. Cindy, is the best thing maybe to just because I would respond to a bunch of those. I think you make some good points in them. And so, but there's a thread you're going to have to follow through to take out first-time home buyer. And then also, like, for example, there's one bullet in here. This is the structures must be suitable for family occupancy with no more or less than 3 bedrooms. So I understand we want to make the minimum lip requirements, but I don't know that we want to go all the way to family. And so there's a bunch of stuff weaved throughout this that you're going to have to catch. I don't know the best way to do that.
Lauren's going to hate me for this. She's going to be able to take the first pass at changing this. And I guess the question is, do you really want to change the size of the bedrooms? Or do you want to have the structures meet? I mean, these are policy decisions. So even though you may want to cast the broadest net in terms of it not being limited to a first-time home buyer, do you want to change bedroom size? So in some respects, maybe it makes some sense for you all to provide comments on all of these issues. I don't think it's really just a matter of our going through, it's a matter of going through and taking out first-time home buyer, but it is a home buyer project. And then I had some technical questions that I'm happy to talk with Lauren about, or any of you about. But if you're now talking about size, that's a whole different question. And that's a different RFP than what was crafted.
Mm.
And so I think, you could have plenty of veterans that are still in families and they still want 2 or 3 bedroom, or seniors. I mean, that might want to live here. It's really a question of, given this property and wanting to maximize what you get out of the property. I mean, the initial understanding was this is what you wanted for bedrooms. And now if that's not, then it's more a matter of the board giving us a little more input than our just going through and slaying out words, I think. Lauren, tell me if you disagree.
Yeah, no, I think I would second that. I mean, if we could have the drafts, what I would suggest, I guess, is if everyone's going to send their sort of comments on the thing, like if everyone can do that, and then we'll go through and figure out if there's obvious consensus, I can make a red line document and pass it to Cindy. But if there's a couple of things that are either everybody's not on the same page, then we need to have a larger discussion.
I would,
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I would make a framing comment, which would be, I would take the same approach here, which is cast the widest net. Like, you know, I don't know that you can get 2, 3 bedroom units on this property, or that would be the best. I think what we want to get out of it, right, is at a minimum, anyways, this was how I viewed it. We want to get a minimum of 2 SHI units. So, you know, if there is somebody who comes in here and they see a floor plan for 4 1-bedroom studio senior units, and we think that works, like, you know, just cast the widest possible net. We don't want to be telling developers how to develop this property. We want developers to take a look at what we're asking them to do and give us their best plans and ideas. And I think that to the extent we have limiting language in the RFP, I don't know that that was a policy decision. Anyways, it certainly wasn't my intent, or would not have been, you know, my intent. And then I'm happy to go through the document and send back markups to that effect, and that'll affect a few of these, right? Like, it's tricky where that'll pop up on you, first time home buyer and number and size of bedrooms.
Lauren, I'll go back to you in just a second. I'm in agreement with Tom's comments with respect to effectively putting this out such that a developer is responding to us as to what they believe is the most appropriate way to develop that site. Because right now we've got a site and we've got no units. As Rob pointed out, in the past 10 years, we've added exactly 0. If a developer would have come back to us and say that they believe that and they made a compelling argument that the best use of that site is a single unit, 3 bedrooms, et cetera. And, you know, then it's not so much a policy decision as the way we're going to allocate that one property. It becomes a matter of determining whether or not that meets the needs of this particular project. Likewise, developer may come back and say, best bet here is 2 units, 1 3-bedroom, 1 2-bedroom, or whatever it might be. The point is that what we're hoping that the RFP will achieve for us is discovery. I think that's the best way I know how to put it. And if we're prescriptive on this very small footprint, then I think we're trying to, you know, we've got one developer on our trust, just one, and we've got a whole bunch of other people who are interested in seeing what's going to happen. We don't have the expertise collectively to define what we're going to put there. So let's think about it from that perspective. That's my input. Cindy, I'm sorry, Cindy, hold on just a second. Lauren, I promised I would get back to you, and then Cindy.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I think this might be my observation, but I think when we originally started talking about this project, we were really targeting it for like a Habitat for Humanity, which is a specific type of product of affordable housing. So I think that we started sort of looking at similar, you know, crafting it towards that. And now the discussion that I'm hearing, at least, is that now that we're thinking really through the nuts and bolts of this, we do want to cast a wider net, and we want to reshape it in a way that's more vague is the wrong word, but less limiting. So when we're looking at it from that perspective, I think I hear what you're saying. There's certain pieces that can be either eliminated or sort of dialed back. But I think that's how we started. We started more in a narrow focus, and now we're sort of backing out into a wider view, which is, you know, fine. It just, I think that's where the shift in gear came from throughout this process.
Look, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry, Lauren. You're absolutely right. That's the road we went down originally. And I'm not trying to kid myself into believing that we're going to get 30 respondents or even 4. In all likelihood,
or even 2. It might just be Habitat, right?
Yeah, it might just be Habitat. But as a matter of course, if we don't discipline our thinking appropriately, then we're going to find ourselves living within a very tight set of guardrails, which frankly, I don't know that we can afford to do in a town that has relatively limited opportunity for affordable housing. So that's the basis under which I'm looking at this at the moment, and recognizing that if we open up the language to cast a wider net, then I think we're effectively getting into a discipline that will allow for a better result over time. Two things. First of all, Diane just pointed out to me that she's got a hard stop, and I didn't realize it was 9:50. I've got a hard stop at 10 as well. Cindy had a comment. I don't want to forget that before we have to at least conclude what we're doing now. So Cindy, fire away.
My comment is really pretty generic here. And that is, from everything I hear you saying, I agree with what Lauren had said. What you may want to give some thought to is in the ranking of how something is most advantageous, highly advantageous, not advantageous. You may or may not want to weight it. So maybe you want a minimum of 2 bedrooms, as we'll get a higher rating than single bedrooms, or not. I'm just saying, if you want to give any preferences to certain types of things you want to see, make note that those types of things can come into the weighting of the proposal.
Okay.
That's it.
And that's something we can determine when we're setting up the criteria for weighting it. We don't have to put it in the RFP.
Well, you kind of,
You do.
you want to put as much detail of what you want in the RFP. Like if a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom and a 1-bedroom, they're going to get ranked the same, that's one thing. But if you want to encourage more bedrooms, then you want to have 2 proposals that, if all things being equal, one has 3 bedrooms, one has 1, the 3-bedroom has a higher rating. So it's all checks and balances about anything you want to weight.
All right, Rob.
Yeah,
Henry.
I think we keep talking about not limiting. I think in today's world, we would never want, as a preference, to have 1 bedroom. So, I mean, 2-bedroom minimum, I think, should be there, and then they can go from there. I mean, everybody today, maybe not in the pandemic, but particularly seniors and veterans are going to have somebody who would maybe stay in a house. And so to have 1 bedroom or have a studio deal, I think would be very limiting in today's world.
Yeah, fair. Maybe on this project in particular, it's worth considering. I think there's probably a lot more discussion, Rob, to be had on that. I do know that there is, especially with seniors, if a 1-bedroom unit makes it excessively more affordable, they become of great interest. You'd be surprised at the level of desire there is in this town for just a.
No, your point. I'm sure your point's valid, but I'm just, again, even but saying
in this instance, I agree with you. Yeah. Lauren.
So I'm just looking, I know everybody has to go at 10. So in the interest of time, I'd like to suggest I can take a first sort of stab at this red line to send out based on the comments that we've had from folks, and send that around for people to consider. If there's more comments, you can send them back to me. And of course, I'll be in communication with Cindy, but I think that's where we need to go from here. And then we, at our next meeting, can then discuss if there's other points, where we need to debate upon.
All right. So let me ask you a couple of things, guys. And this is directed to the trustees. Lauren will take a pass at this, which means that you enter your comments and send them back to Lauren. I ask that you do this relatively quickly, like within the next week. Lauren, I then ask that if you would, yes, pass them to Cindy, but communicate with me as chairman. If we are close, or if it appears that we are close to having this document ready for publication and posting, then I'd like to move it along. Otherwise, we're waiting to November to approve it. And this is going to go up, we just get later and later and later. And I'm sensitive to Rob Henry's relatively consistent observations that this stuff takes way too much time, right? It does. Open meeting law being what it is, the machine of government working relatively slowly being what it is. I'm asking for each of you to be respondent to Lauren so that if we have the possibility of approving this sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks on an individual 10-minute meeting, then that would be my goal. Okay? And this is another concrete step that we got to take. I'd rather not wait till our November meeting.
Very good.
Agreed.
Great.
Okay. All right. Do we have any motions to tackle at the moment on this, or are we pretty much clear on what we're doing?
I think we're clear.
Yeah, I don't think we need to move any piece of this, right?
No,
No,
Okay. And I'm embarrassed to say that, do we have minutes to review?
We don't. I have to send some out. I will do that for our next meeting.
All right. All right. Thank you guys for expending an extraordinary amount of time. Rob, thank you for auditing. Rob Jeffers, thank you for auditing. Cindy, appreciate your time as always. And Lauren and Jen, of course. A motion to dismiss is in order then.
I'll make a motion to dismiss. Steve, will you just get in touch with the 3 members who weren't here and just kind of summarize to them next steps?
I will.
Okay, so I move to adjourn.
second.
All right. By roll, start with Rob Henry.
To
Your
terminate
vote.
the.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Diane,
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Tom,
Tom Need, aye.
and Steve Gomer, aye. Thanks again, guys. Much appreciated.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.